6 against the Raiders in the AFC Championship game to put the Bills up 21-3. The second choice was 1991 AFC Championship game against the Broncos, Carlton Bailey's tip pass from John Elway. The third choice was from the comeback game, 1992 AFC wildcard, Nate Odoms off of Warren Moon in overtime. And then the fourth choice was the most recent choice and the favorite of some of our younger fans and younger listeners, the 2020 AFC divisional round, Taron Johnson against the Ravens, the pick 6 102-yard return. Don, give me your ranking and why.
To me, number one's pretty clear. I would say it's the Carlton Bailey 1991 against the playoffs because that's the only time the Bills reached the end zone the whole game.
Correct, 10-7. They won 10-7.
Yep.
Third quarter, it's 3-0. It's shocking that both offenses have been completely shut out in the first half. It's Elway against Kelly. It's crazy.
Thurman and Steve Atwater was all over the place like a missile.
I
mean, Thurman rarely took. One of the things about him, he just really took those hard shots. But I remember a couple times that game, Atwater hit him hard. But yeah, the only touchdown of the game was that play. It literally was a difference maker.
So that's your number one. What's your number two?
Number two, and being an old school guy with all the Bills, I hadn't thought of the Taron Johnson one. I should have. To me, that put the Bills up 17-3, and they never looked back.
Yep.
And they're also close. But then then I would say it's Odoms.
Okay. So you go Nate Odoms comeback game overtime. Obviously that's the second most important one.
Important. And the tally one is absolutely right there on Mount Rushmore. And I love the fact that you posted the clip last night on Twitter of our conversation with him. He remembered it so well. Yep. I guess the only thing for me, if there is, we won the game 51-3.
Sure. Yep.
So there were
that game did that play
touchdowns.
That play didn't flip the game. They were going to win that game with or without that play.
Yeah. So
Okay.
But
it
was the first time going to the Super Bowl.
Yes.
So up until that point, it was clearly
correct
the best playoff interception ever. So yours.
So you'd go your final ranking is Carlton, Bailey. Mm-hmm. Then it would be
Taron Johnson,
mm-hmm. Nate Odoms, Darryl Talley. A couple honorable mentions in there. The Micah Hyde pick, probably the most incredible football play and football interception in Bills history.
Ed Reed-esque.
Yeah, against the Patriots in the wild card game. And then there's the 1980 interception against the Jets, wild card, game clinching, goal line interception as well, which I was not as familiar with until a couple people on Twitter, pointed that one out.
Neither was I. We saw some names on Twitter following us that are familiar names, and I think one of them was the one that suggested that one. It was like, man, this is cool. You said it was blowing up. It was getting a lot of play. It was fun.
Yeah. So I kind of took it from two different angles here. One is what's the best and most important in Bills history, and then what's the most memorable, play interception. For me personally, sentimentally, I told Daryl I had my first beer at 14 with my now late father. Yeah, so Darryl Talley's pick. And the only other argument I would make for that one is that play happened and I knew we were going to the Super Bowl. Like the place was insane. It was the greatest atmosphere for a Bills game ever. The Gulf War had just begun. Yeah. It's the Bills' first AFC Championship game at home. It's USA flags everywhere. I mean, to go up 21-3 on a pick six, it gives me goosebumps thinking about it right now. Yeah. Like my legs are tingling. And I remember turning to my buddy. I'm like, we're going to the Super Bowl. Yeah. Like you knew it. It was the first time in my life I ever knew the Bills were going to the Super Bowl. Yeah. So sentimentally, and for that reason, that one will always be my number one. Sure. Even though analytically, if you went to Football Outsiders, they would tell you that one probably had the least win share of the four, which is fine.
That's not how we're setting this.
That's not how we're setting this up. Ironically, number one, the greatest interception is Carlton Bailey. But in a funny way, it's almost like the least emotional of the four.
It was relief.
That's exactly right. Nate Odoms' one is in probably the Bills' most famous and greatest game of all time.
Yep.
And it's in overtime. And that was relief as well because, oh God, if Warren Moon comes, because they had just driven the ball down the field for a field goal.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, it was the old sudden death rules
overtime,
where
whoever scores, however they score.
I remember how devastated I was when they won the coin flip. And I'm like, oh, shit. They're just going to go down and score. And all this would have been for nothing. Imagine if they would have if the Oilers would have got to the 30-yard line and Aldel Greco just like clunks one in from 45 yards.
Right.
What an awful experience that would have been. So in some ways, that one was almost like as emotional as like the Darryl Talley one. And then I read a number of people on Twitter talking about how emotional the Taron Johnson one was, where it's a 102-yard pick six, which is in some ways even crazier than Carlton Bailey running in from the 10 and Darryl kind of coming in from the 25.
It's 14-point swing, of course, any pick six is, but if Lamar Jackson ties it up right there.
Yep. And you got to put into context two other things. It's right after the drought. Right. It's their second home game, and really there's 6,000 people in the stands.
Oh, that's right.
It's COVID. Yeah. There's nobody there. The world sucks. The world sucks. In January of 2021, the world sucked. There was nothing was good, So that interception and that release, that you felt like they were going to win the game after that play, that relief and that release, and seeing 6,000 people in the stands go bonkers.
Yeah, and I watched it with my daughter, now an adult, and to watch them, like, this was their first big
This was their Darryl Talley. Yeah. This was that same play, because they had lost the playoff game in Jacksonville. They lost the playoff game in Houston the year before. They barely squeaked by the Colts in that scary wild card game in the first week that could have lost.
Phillip Rivers.
Yeah. So this was like, oh my God, we're going to the AFC Championship game. Yeah. And it was such a bright light in a really dark time, for the country and for Buffalo, for everybody. Okay. So I can see the argument in all four, but I'm going to kind of go with you. Carlton Bailey's number one, even though it just leaves me a little cold. I don't know why. Plus they got waxed by the Redskins in the Super Bowl, or 2 weeks later. So it's like that little. So Carlton Bailey's number one. I think Taron Johnson's number two. I think because it's a pick six, 102 yards. I think it's the second best interception in Bills history. Number three,
playoff history.
Playoff history. Number three is Nate Odom's comeback game. You flip possession. You won the game because of that pick. And then number four would be my man Darryl. My beer with my dad. It's number one in my heart, but it's probably number four in my head.
Okay. Yeah. No, listen. I remember when we were going to have Darryl Talley on in the fall. You were chomping at the bit to talk about.
It's my favorite play in Bills history.
Yeah, and you told him, and again, the fact that he just he remembered studying film, and I'm gonna be.
He talks about getting to the dig.
Yeah,
and he actually told Ray Bentley the same thing. And after the game got out of hand, Ray Bentley came in and had 2 picks of his own, which is incredible. Right, just speaks to what Darryl is as a player and how excited he was when he heard that I had my first beer at 14 years old.
He clapped.
Yes, and he said, "Congratulations!" And that's why we all love Darryl Talley.
That's right.
That's why he's the absolute best. So I think that kind of puts to rest the fact that we both agreed, and the majority of people did say Carlton Bailey was number one. So I think that's probably a fair consensus that that's the greatest interception in Bills history. Before we get to our interview, I know that we're excited that we're going to try to have on what we feel like are the 3 greatest regular season interception candidates. Maybe you could tell everybody who those are.
We will be talking to Matt Darby next week.
He had a pick at the end of the game, week 2 in Dallas, 1993, the year after Dallas beat the Bills 52-17 in the Super Bowl. It was the Emmitt Smith holdout. Jerry Jones is in the tunnel, famously walking towards the field as if he's going to celebrate and say, "How about them Cowboys?" And then the pick happens, and he sheepishly runs back in the tunnel. It's beautiful.
It was incredibly athletic play. He not only tipped it, but then he just scooped it up before it hit the ground. But as you pointed out the other day to me, we were only up 3 points.
Yeah.
So Dallas could have tied it and gone into overtime, and
it was a shocking play.
It really was. Oh, Greg Brown he lost his mind.
Yeah,
he's just screaming. You look that up.
It was shocking that it ended that way, because you were almost mentally preparing for, best case is field goal tie.
Yep.
Worst case is they score and win.
Yep.
So that there's one.
Yep.
Throw us the other two real quick.
Drayton Florence. I talked to him. He had to take his daughter. She just graduated from Florida State. I had a little argument because my dad went to Florida. We had a little fun exchange, and then she's going to dental school. But he said after that he's going to come on, and of course we're going to talk about that play. It was beating the Patriots in 2011, and being down 21-3, and Gronkowski And
his pick six there flipped the game.
Yep, sorry,
and flipped positions.
But yep. And it was the go ahead score in that game. And then
number 3 is
Twitter
the leader in the clubhouse.
Leader in the clubhouse, Sam Adams. And I'm talking to him a little bit, and he's a busy man, but he said, come on, I don't know when it's going to be, but of course we're going to talk about that play. I still got to watch the Bullies.
The Bullies of Baltimore, the 30 for 30 on ESPN. Yeah, he's featured in there.
Twitter, you're right. That is big. Sam Adams, even Dan Evans, who's at the team, chimed in.
Yes,
with that, it was cool to see.
It's one of the 5 most memorable plays in Bills history. Yeah, let alone touch any play, not just interception, but any play. So we're excited to have that in the next upcoming weeks. We got a great interview on Sunday with Matt Beauvais. We're going to talk about the schedule release, his cool interview that he did with Sal Capaccio with Mike North from the NFL. And then next week, Don and I are going to run through the 2023 schedule, tell his memories and stories of all of the road venues and opponents that the Bills will play. And then a special treat, we have the professor of analytics at UB who got a grant from the NFL to basically be kind of the Wizard of Oz and set all of the algorithms that end up determining the NFL schedule. And you will be left with one phrase: the sun will grow cold, before you could ever get through all the permutations of the NFL schedule. It's a fascinating listen.
No one, when they hear it, will ever question the effort and the lengths that the league goes through Mark and UB to ensure, to the best of their ability, that the schedule's fair in so many ways I'd never even thought of.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everyone. We are joined by Kristen Kimmick, the founder and president of Bills Mafia Babes, a very familiar face, I'm sure, to all of Bills Mafia. She is also the president of the 501c3 for all of the great causes and generosity that her organization has started and contributed to over the years. We are thrilled that you joined us today. Can you just let us know where you're calling us from?
Yeah, so I am actually downtown Buffalo. So.
Okay. And we love your setup. We remarked before we started recording here that yours is certainly more symmetrical and more organized than ours in our corporate studio here.
I think if I went and grabbed a level and took it there, that bubble would be right in the middle there.
So Kristen, I reached out to you on Twitter, and we had Del Reed on a couple weeks ago from 26 Shirts, and it occurred to me that your mission and what you have built and what you have done is equally impressive to him, as his organization. And we just love the fact that you're, using your platform and your visibility for good. Before we get into, all of the charitable donations and things that you've done, maybe you could just kind of take people back to, your journey as a Bills fan. First and foremost, I know your dad was an important part of it. Maybe you could just talk to people about how you got to where you are now.
Yeah. It's actually an interesting journey, to be honest. So having to do with my dad was a Kansas City Chiefs fan. So that is kind of the funniest part, I think, of why, we kind of had our own little rivalry going. And especially, when we both started getting good with our teams. So grew up in Orchard Park, though, and that's why I became a Bills fan. He taught me the game of football. He tried to get me to become a Chiefs fan. I didn't like the colors. I was fine, Actually, funny from there, my favorite color was turquoise. So he actually bought me a Dan Marino jersey, trying to sway me to the Dolphins, because he said anybody but the Bills.
That's funny. Was he from here, or was he from Kansas City?
Yeah, so he grew up in Depew, but when he was 18, he got drafted into Vietnam, and they stationed him out of Fort Riley, Kansas, and the Bills were horrendous at that point, and the Chiefs were just about to win their first Super Bowl. So he flipped the bandwagon because he said he didn't want to get into some trouble over in Vietnam and go down rooting for a losing team. So,
wow.
So he came back and he just kind of stuck with it, and then tried to turn me when he moved back to Buffalo, and obviously had me, tried to raise me as one, and I just growing up in Orchard Park around that vibe, I just wasn't having it even as a 5-year-old. So
yeah, right. Like that'd have been tough for you if you were the only kid in school cheering for the Chiefs or God forbid the Dolphins.
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
you made two good choices, avoiding the Chiefs and then certainly avoiding the Dolphins.
At least you grew up to love football. So
Right.
that's the fun part.
Yeah. So then where did it go from there? As you get to be a teenager and as an adult, I mean, the Bills, obviously weren't great for a long period of time. Like how did things change for you?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was always a fan, right? Like I said, starting at a young age, my dad taught me the game at a young age. It was just the two of us, single father. So we spent a lot of time in garages, tinkering on cars and watching football. So it was just something I was so subjected to that as I got into my teen years and my adult years, I wanted to be able to talk about those things. Like it's a passion. You want to be able to talk about it with other people that are also interested. So obviously got on the social media bandwagon and was in, I don't know if you guys remember way back then, there was like a 2 Bills drive, like Bills. There was like a forum. I was in that, all these different things. And, Twitter started to get bigger, hopped on that. But one of the biggest issues that I was running into is that as a female, I wasn't taken seriously. It was just kind of like, that's kind of what came with it. And things have progressed now, but especially, 15 years ago, it was not the way that it is now. So I finally kind of reached a breaking point about 8 years ago and said, well, there's clearly something missing in this space. And it's a space for the women to be able to discuss the sport, because we can be equally as interested in it, even if I couldn't play little loop football growing up, So I went on Facebook one night after a little bit of a bashing on Twitter from some men. And I just created a Facebook group and called it the Bills Mafia Babes. And I just kind of did it as like almost like a selfish solution to an issue that was really bothering me. And when I did that, I added 25 women into it and I locked it down so that you couldn't just join it on your own. You had to be approved to join. And over the next couple of months, we just had a blast with it. That's where we talked about football. It was almost, I hate the word safe space, but that's really what it was. So over time, that just started. Some of the women are like, this is really cool. Can I add some more of my girlfriends in here? I was like, absolutely. And it just kind of over time, over the last 8 years, snowballed from that. So now we're at about 30,500 women in there, all Bills fans. And it's such a cool community. We work really hard to keep it positive, upbeat. We even have some players' mothers, wives, girlfriends are in there. They stay quiet for the most part, but we do have a couple that'll tell funny stories, things like that. And it's just a nice space for women that maybe even are just getting into it because of their sons or their husbands. They can ask questions without any sort of ridicule. So we've done a lot there, and then kind of it spun a little bit. Bills Mafia loves to do charity work and help out. And so we had so many women in this group wanting to start fundraisers and things like that we got to a point where we were like, we need to have something official because it's not okay to have money flying left and right through this, not, on some kind of books. So about 2 years ago, we started a nonprofit, a 501c3, so that was, booked and legal and things like that.
Yep.
And now we have that. And so the mission of that is we partner up with a different one of the Bills players every month. We figure out what charity or cause is close to their heart. And then we'll fundraise, we'll do events. If they're doing their own events, we'll send them volunteers, things like that, just to kind of give back and also, allow the women to be able to give back as a whole too.
That's outstanding. Josh has 2 sons. I have 2 daughters, and it was so gratifying when they got to the age of understanding the game. I think for one of my daughters, it's when they put, and this goes both ways. I mean, anybody who's learning football, when they did the line on the TV.
Oh yeah, the first down marker.
That was brilliant.
Yep.
But they started loving it. I hate to say it, I don't mean it this way, almost too much, because when I was there and I traveled with the team and coming home after losses, they were just heartbroken. I'm like, it's okay. We're going to play again. We'll be okay. But another thing too, we had Christine Lisi from ESPN on last month. That was one of the most fun interviews we've had. I heard a lot of the same sentiment. And she was from Western New York too.
Yep, she's from Olean, and she got her start in sports broadcasting, and then got a job at ESPN, but still loves the Bills and all. And there was not a good place for her to discuss sports, quote unquote, as a female. It reminds me of growing up. I seem to remember something called, do you remember Women Understanding Football? It was like a class that you could take.
Yeah.
Did you remember that? The Bills did.
I vaguely do. I vaguely do.
And I just always found that kind of weird. That's like, well, wait a minute. Why isn't it just anyone understanding football? Like, how about just like beginner football understanding? So I just thought it was, I just, as a kid growing up here and all, I just always thought it was odd that it was called Women Understanding Football, as if you would have to talk about it in a different way or like in a different language. Because clearly, that just always kind of struck me. And I hadn't thought of it in decades until you were just talking now. So what do you attribute that like stigma to? I mean, now there's female coaches. The NFL has had a really big boost in the visibility. Obviously, Kim Pegula was the first female part owner.
Yes.
Like, do you think it's been like a conscious effort on the NFL's part to promote more female like faces and voices, and is it much better for you like outside of the Mafia Babes, like outside of your quote unquote safe space? Do you find Twitter and Facebook any better than it was 10 years ago?
Oh, it's so much better.
Good.
It really is. And I think there's just a lot of women before us that are, finally starting to break those glass ceilings. Like they're walking so that we can run sort of thing, I actually think, if I'm remembering right, I'm pretty sure that the first female coach in the NFL was an assistant coach for the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, I worked with her, Catherine. She was in the office. Josh, when you were there, Debbie Driscoll was I just got a text from. She was. She came over from the Jets with Laura Young, and she was working quality control. And then when I think it was, I want to say special teams, or one of the coaches got promoted, and he had to fill the spot. And we were talking about it. He was like, I already know who it's going to be. And let's go. And it was Catherine, and it was like from quality control. Yep. She was excellent. And she was very quiet, but boy, she knew it. Yeah. Talk about a glass ceiling. It was really neat when that happened. Say whatever you want about Rex Ryan. And I actually really liked him, but he made that happen and had no apologies for it. And it worked out really well.
Yeah. I absolutely love that. I remember that happening, and I remember the group like being so excited about it.
I bet Rex is the kind of guy to do it too, right? He doesn't care, I don't care. I'm going to do this, and to hell with you. So could you kind of tell people like what it's like, maybe like on a game day on the Bills Mafia Babes page, or like scene? Do you go to most of the games? Is there like a community that gets together in like the Hammers lot or one of the lots? Like what does game day look like for you?
Yeah, so inside the group, it's actually kind of funny. It got so crazy on game days over the last couple of years. I mean, it really kind of did its largest expansion inside the community. I would say maybe the last 3 years, as our name was starting to get a little bit more well known, but also as the Bills were getting better. So game days are so crazy inside of the Facebook page that we have to start like a game day thread, and just tell them to post only on the game day thread, because it got to be hundreds of posts that we were trying to sort through. But with that, I mean, you'll see almost 1,000 comments of the women talking on any given game day, which is just awesome. In person, some of us will meet over at the Hammer lot. We're actually working on, we didn't have like a specific space, right? So we're looking to find like a weekly tailgate space for the women. Like, hey, this is where the Bills Mafia Babes tailgate is going to be every week, so that as women are coming into town and things like that, they already have a place set up where they can now go and maybe meet some of the women that they've been talking online to for a couple of years and haven't met in person. So that's something we're definitely working on for the season. I'm really excited about.
What percentage of your like Facebook followers and your members are local, and how many are national?
Yeah, so I actually was trying to figure that out the other day. I would say about 50 or 60% are local, probably closer to 60. But we actually have, national, we've got so many women in different cities that they link up within the group. Somebody will say, who's in Sarasota, Florida, and 5, 6, 7 other girls will say me, and then they'll go and they'll meet at a bar to watch the game together. We also have people internationally. We've got people in Germany. We've got people in Venezuela. We've got people in Australia. Yeah, so it's really cool. A bunch from London, actually. So they're getting really geared up for us to come over for this game this year.
Oh, wow. I'm sure they are. Josh, you mentioned the Hammerlot, and then she mentioned the Hammerlot. How did you know that?
I have a wife,
okay.
so she's a member of the Bills Mafia Babes. And she's talked enough. She
cool.
She shares season tickets with my two friends. Kristen, I got in trouble late last year because I misspoke and I said that my two guy friends take my wife to games, which is the improper way of putting it. So I slept on the couch for a night or two when they go together. So they go to games, and Jody's always talked about, maybe going to see the Mafia Babes
cool.
in the Hammers Lab. She knows that you go there. Thanks, Don. Anyways, so you guys could have like a Mafia Babes meetup in like other cities.
Yeah, we've been talking. There's so many things that it's kind of like with the growth, we're just starting to toss around these ideas, right? Like we're talking about having almost like a national Mafia Babes meetup where everybody in their different cities meet up on the same day at the same time and take pictures and put them into an album, in the group, things like that. So we're really about connecting a lot of these women at this point, because it was almost like up until the last few years, we were all enjoying the sport, but we were on our own little islands, It was like I was tailgating with primarily, 100 men every weekend. And as you meet your girls, like it just becomes that much cooler. So we want to keep that vibe going and really kind of unite a bunch of the women too.
I think Buffalo would own that. I would think that before even talking to Kristen, but now hearing her, I just can imagine they would just dominate that.
Right. What do you find the differences like when you watch a game with men and women? Like what are the fun things that you notice the differences between the typical guy and the typical girl watching an NFL game? Like what and how are you as a watcher? Are you a yeller? Are you quiet? Are you one of those people that need to watch it alone when they're on the road? Like what does that look like for you?
What's funny is that I see every different aspect. There's some of the women that they have to stay home in front of their TV, and sometimes their men are even in the other room because they need to watch it alone. At the games, I've been with so many of the different women inside of the games. I actually traveled to all of the games last season, so I did. Everything during the season. It was a goal of mine forever. So I sat with different women almost every single game. In all the different cities, and they are just I'm a yeller.
Yeah.
I believe in like the 12th man. I believe that we all have to be there in the stadium doing our part to cause audibles and things like that. So I'm a yeller, and most of the women that I've been with are just as loud. So
what was the highlight last year on the road? What game was it that just any that stick out?
It's so tough.
A lot of good ones.
I always go back to Kansas City just because, again, my connection with that. But that one, I've been to Kansas City so many times in the last few years. I was there for 13 seconds during, I was there for the COVID playoff game. I was there. And honestly, we lost every game that I've been inside of Kansas City. So I was kind of to a point where I was like, maybe I shouldn't go back.
Right. Absolutely.
But, kind of taking that one this season was awesome. And then honestly, I want to say that weirdly, one of the most fun games was when Cleveland got moved to Detroit.
Yeah.
Oh, you were there.
I was at. We took my wife and I took our boys to that game. That was a fun atmosphere.
Right.
Yeah, it was super cool. And that stadium was shockingly nice. Like I had never been in there, and it kind of made me think that maybe we needed to put a roof up over our new one, just because we walked in, it was cold. But what a beautiful stadium, even for being 20 years old. And it was kind of a fun vibe because it's probably like 70-30 Bills fans to Browns fans there, but there was a sizable amount of Browns fans, and everybody was respectful, and it was just it kind of felt like a big party.
Yeah, and I felt like, what's funny is that people have asked me like which one of the stadiums I was in last year was my favorite. Now, everybody, I think, thinks it's going to be SoFi. SoFi is cool, don't get me wrong, but it feels like a spaceship, right? Like it's very LA. But my favorite was honestly Ford Field, because it was just it was going to be a sleeper for me. I had no idea that I was going to love that stadium as much as I did. So, but yeah, that atmosphere, there was a lot of Detroit fans there too for that. And they all seemed to swing on our side. So.
Yep. And then there was always, what I always find funny are like the random NFL fans. So you'll be at a Bills game and it'll be Bills Broncos, and you'll get the guy with the Cowboys jersey on. Like I always found that to be that, or if you have like an NBA jersey on, at the NFL game. I always found that to be kind of confounding and confusing too, when it would be either random team that's not playing or completely different sport.
That London game is all that. You see every single one of you. I actually felt bad because it was supposed to be a home game for Jacksonville, and there was a smattering of Jacksonville fans. That was about it.
Do you guys have a planned meetup in London?
Not yet.
Okay.
I've been talking to actually a good friend of mine from Rochester, married a soccer player, and has been living in London for the last 3 or 4 years. And she's been messaging me about doing, a Babes meetup over there. I feel like everybody and their mother's brother has a plan to go to this London game. So I think that Bills Mafia may really infiltrate this one. I honestly think the hardest part is going to be able to get flights over there with the amount of people that are planning on going. So we'll see what happens with that. I think we're waiting a little bit. I know that the date for that kind of leaked a couple days ago. Yeah,
October 8th is the heavily rumored. And it's funny because we have an interview that's coming out later on this weekend with the guy who's in charge of the analytics making the NFL schedule. He was a retired professor at UB, and they talk about seeding games where there's so many different permutations and possibilities for the NFL schedule that the NFL has to pick like 50 of the highest profile spots and do those games early. So I bet you those London games are already booked.
Yeah, it was a good interview. It's just the dumbest I've felt in a long time. Listening to how smart that guy was.
Yeah, he made us feel dumb.
But we got to get some good stuff out of it.
But I noticed that game leaked, and it makes sense that that's one of the games, like he pointed out, that the NFL picks ahead of time to give like a scaffolding for the rest of the schedule. Sorry, we got in the weeds there a little bit, and we're talking about the other interview. But that makes sense. It'll be like October 8th, and I've heard that the best course of action is to get to New York City and then fly out of New York City nonstop to London. If anybody's interested, that's what a couple of people have kind of indicated to me. Can you tell us, Kristen, like, do you have any affiliation with the Bills? Have the Bills themselves, the organization, been supportive of you guys, or is it something that's like completely separate?
We've crossed paths with them a little bit. We haven't worked on any projects with them specifically. I'm going to say yet. I'm really hopeful that we get there at some point. We've also worked with kind of like some of their sponsors, right? Like we worked with Austin Air and ECMC in November with the Jordan Poyer Foundation, because we've done some work with him where we help provide 210 Thanksgiving dinners to dialysis patients in there. Wow. So, and that was kind of like a little one-off side project. We take on some of those as well. We'll, like I said, we dedicate each month to a different player in their cause, but every once in a while, things like that will pop up, especially around the holidays, where, we'll hop on board and help some of the other players with volunteers for their events and collecting donations for canned goods and whatever else they need. But yeah, no crossovers with the actual Bills organization yet, but I'm hoping that that's in the future.
I got a feeling it's coming. I don't see how they could ignore 30,000 of you. I'm sure. And there's some good people like-minded. They like to do some charitable things. I was reading where when Trey White got hurt in 2021, you arranged to raise $100,000, I think it was, for his food bank in Louisiana.
Yeah, I think we actually totaled out around 175,000. But
wow,
that was one of the bigger moments. And we that one was just kind of like, we've kind of figured out that a lot of Bills Mafia does turn to us for where they should send money when things like that happen, because we are so familiar with the players and what their different organizations are that they actually care about. So, we have a spreadsheet of the actual ones so people aren't sending their money to things that are irrelevant to that specific player. So we knew that Trey has worked very closely in his hometown with that, Northeast Louisiana food bank. And so when people were kind of coming to us saying, like, where do we donate for this? That's what we threw out there, and it really took off. So that was a really, really cool thing to see. And they had actually just gone through the holidays, and their shelves were empty. So
it happened on Thanksgiving, right?
Yeah.
He got hurt. Oh, that's perfect timing. Maybe switch things up a little bit here. Obviously, there's been some controversies in the last, 12 months. I guess we're just kind of curious your take on what happened last year, with the reporter in the basement, the podcast. Kind of hit a little close to home for us, being that we are in a basement doing a podcast. I guess, how do you fight those perceptions that are still out there? How frustrating was it to you, to see that still kind of, not that you didn't know it or it still is around, but, what was your reaction to that? And what do you think the impact was that of that going forward?
You know what, in a way it's kind of sad, because I think as women we've had to grow that really thick skin to tune that kind of noise out anyways. I mean, like personally, I get things like that said to me either on Twitter and honestly even in DMs. I will have men DM me some of the most horrendous things. And it's just so frequent that those words don't really bother you that much anymore. But what really bothered me was that it was such a respected member of this community with such a large platform that has been around for decades. And for him to say those things, even if he tried to come out later and say it was a joke, it's not. Like, you're alienating an entire group of this fan base. And, you know, to call us like wannabe cheerleaders and things like that, like, it's just insinuating that we don't have any kind of brains about the game. And that's what we've been fighting against for all these years, you know? So it was frustrating. But again, it's one of those things that you just kind of keep your head up and you keep moving past it.
That's a good answer. He totally took the high road. And it's when he had Christine Lisi from ESPN on, it was like the following week, and you brought it up in a very tactful way. And she's like, yeah, I heard it happen again. But I you know, if I'm reading the room, the region, even nationally, it just did not play well. It was a real misconception. And
it's got to be frustrating though. Like, you know, you feel like you've built this community and you almost just hope, I guess. I mean, Don and I obviously are not privy to your DMs, and I can only imagine. And funny enough, it took you a while to get back to me, and I actually thought to myself, I'm like, oh God, she must get so many DMs and so much crap in her DMs that when you wrote back to me like a week and a half later, and you're like, yeah, you know, I get some, and I'm like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Like, I can totally I actually thought you might just block your DMs. Once I thought about it, I'm like, oh, maybe there would have been a more effective way to try to get a hold of you, because I'm sure you just get bombarded with a bunch of bullshit on there, you know?
Yeah. That's why it's like a once a week check it sort of thing, you know?
Do you have help? I mean,
is anybody nice and real in there?
Do you have assistants or people that help you with some of this, or are you still flying solo on all of it?
Oh, no,
1,000 people.
So, actually, like with the Facebook group itself, about, I want to say like a year and a half into it, it was already at, you know, a couple thousand women, and it was too much for me to handle. So I brought on a woman actually from the West Coast. Her name's Laura McKee. And so she came on and became another admin with me to help kind of run this page. And over time, we've grown it. I believe we have 8 or 9 admins running the Facebook side of it. I also have a couple of different women running the Twitter page. I've got a couple of us on the Instagram page. And then on our board for the nonprofit is, I'm the president. Laura, my original first admin, is the vice president. And Leslie Willie, I don't know if that name rings a bell, but she was one of the co-founders of the original Bills Mafia with Del Reed and Bree. Breon Harris. She's actually the treasurer of, on the board. And so she's one of the ones that's very heavily, so yeah, we've got, there's a whole team of us at this point, because there's no way I would be able to handle this by myself anymore. So.
Right. It's amazing what you've built. Just like I told you before, we had Del Reed on, and I'm in awe of what he's done. And I'm in awe of what you've done, because you don't even have like a product to sell. You're just, selling, a community and an experience. And like you said, like a safe space for people to just, talk football. It's not even, around a t-shirt a week, which would keep people engaged. So, credit to you for that. And I'm sure it's enhanced, the experiences of so many different women to feel like they're, they belong, and that they're empowered to talk football and have good football takes and bad football takes, just like all the rest of us do. All of us, I got blasted on Old Takes Exposed last year, because after the Minnesota game, I mistakenly posted on Twitter that I thought that was going to be the last loss for the Bills in 2021. Well, I'm sorry, after the Jets game. So the week later against Minnesota, the game ends. Obviously, it's awful. My 10-year-old son, it was his first ever game in the stadium, so I'm devastated for him. And within 5 minutes, I've got like 50 Twitter mentions and likes and whatever else. And I'm like, what is going on? And I looked, and I'm like, oh no. I'm like, Old Takes Exposed had already found my tweet and had put it up. And I'm getting people. I had new friends from Philadelphia and from New England and from Miami. Oh, you're a bozo. You don't know what you're talking about. That was my experience with like Twitter vitriol. And it was fast, and it was furious. I ended up with like 700 comments, just from this innocuous tweet because I just, gave my take. So there are good takes and there are bad takes, male, female, whatever.
You're only off by one game because.
Yeah, then they didn't lose again until the Cincinnati game, and I don't think I would have caught any flack for that. But yeah, he blew me up in his 900,000 Twitter followers, and it made me realize I got to be really careful, what I put on Twitter because man, it's fast and it's furious. Do you feel pressure like with what you post, or because obviously you have a huge platform? Like, is there anything that you try to avoid? Are you guys trying to avoid some of the local controversies and the player drama and all that stuff? Like, how do you guys handle that?
Yes, very much. We try to be conscious of what we post on there. I don't ever want us we're not anything to be out there to be share our political views. We're there for football, so we try to keep it that way. As far as the player drama goes, I think that we have a little bit different of a take on that because we work with these guys, right? And so I think a lot of it too is that from where we're standing, we see a lot more of. We don't just see these guys as guys that are pawns on the field to win football games. Like we've, come to know them, know the things that they care about, know their personalities. And so when you see these things happen, it's like, you know what, these guys are human. They're human, and breakups and things like that are tough, and drama is tough to deal with. And so we don't really touch that because I think that there's a power in letting them live their own lives. I think that's important without their public, or their private lives don't need to be blasted and scrutinized and gone after with a microscope on Twitter by, hundreds of thousands of people that don't know them. So we try and keep that to a minimum. We don't allow any of the women in the group to talk about it, and we'll never post it off our social media, just kind of out of privacy for them, respect for their privacy.
I'm really glad you said that because, Don and I have a unique, experience. We both worked for the team, and they are human beings, and they're young kids. People forget just because they're 6'7" and 300 pounds. Most of these guys are in their early to mid 20s, and Lord knows I was dumb in my early to mid 20s. I'm sure most people were. So the idea that these guys are actual people, and like you said, not pawns, they're not fantasy football players. They're not names on the back of a jersey. Sometimes I think it's hard because they all have helmets on during the game. So it can become kind of impersonal. And hey, this guy only scored 12 points on his fantasy football team, so he sucks, or, whatever else. And then you're right. Like, they are human beings. And I mean, that more than anybody, Don.
For sure. And off the field stuff. And I can guarantee to the extent that, the relationships you've had with the players, and they really appreciate that. That doesn't go unnoticed. And it's not just off the field. It is on the field. Like we were talking to Drew Haddad and Naaman Roosevelt when that episode comes out. But every day, every Tuesday, Drew is hoping just not to get a phone call that came up 648-1800 because every week he's like, oh, this is another week I can buy groceries, and when you combine those two things, a lot of pressure, and and I'm sure that the guys know that for them you guys are a safe organization and a place that they can trust that your motives are what they are, and that's really valuable inside the building, and I'm sure in the locker room. So I'm sure that's really well appreciated. Before we let you go here, Kristen, we do something called the 2-minute warning. We ask you 10 rapid fire questions with 2 minutes or less. Daryl Talley kept it under 2 minutes, so your challenge is to keep it under 2 minutes as well. So Don, fire away. Okay, we got into this a little bit, but here we go. We'll just go with it.
Don doesn't always help with the 2 minutes here.
A little overanalyzation. All right, most interesting place to watch a Bills game.
Ooh, man, I'm not going to be good at this. Probably my friend's basement.
Three people, dead or alive, you'd want to have dinner with.
Ralph Wilson, Josh Allen. Obviously, I would love to pick his brain on some things. And let's go with Chris Pratt. I think he'd be hilarious.
There you go. You're entering an arena. You're a big deal. Dry ice. What's your entrance song?
Oh, goodness, guys. Probably something by AC/DC.
There you go. That's a good one. Best concert you've ever been to?
It's a band called Bastille. I saw him in Toronto.
Cool. Your favorite Buffalo restaurant and the dish you get there?
I like Gabriel's Gate and their wings and their French onion soup.
Your favorite cartoon as a kid?
Rocko's Modern Life.
Oh.
All right. The most annoying fan base in the NFL.
Oh goodness, Patriots.
A popular food, but you hate it.
Eggs.
Eggs.
Yeah.
You hate eggs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Time out. Why?
I don't know. My parents never made them when I was little because my dad didn't like them. And then just growing up, it was kind of like I actually didn't even try an egg till I was 32. So,
Wow.
yeah, and now it's the texture. I just can't get over it.
Little did you know that you'd be discussing eggs on a podcast.
There you go.
All right, time in. Go ahead, Don.
Okay, your top 3 favorite sports movies of all time.
Friday Night Lights, Rudy, and Miracle on Ice.
I'm going to add a new category here. What is the show that you're streaming or binging right now?
Oh God, I love trash TV. So I'm watching. It's actually an older season called The Circle on Netflix.
Oh, I've watched that.
It's so good.
It's so terrible, but it's so good.
I know.
2 more here.
Hold on. My sight line is we changed our big board.
That's
here.
okay. She's going to be way under, so we're
okay.
Good.
When you leave the house, do you leave the dishwasher or dryer on?
Absolutely not.
Wow. All right, and then the big one here: can you drive a stick shift?
Yes, but I wouldn't trust myself to drive like an old classic car that's stick shift. I don't want to blow a clutch.
You did great. I have one follow-up question. Are there Mafia Babes for other team like organizations like yours popping up like with the other fan bases yet?
Yeah, you know what? And they've all popped up in the last few years. I've met somebody from an organization called the Bears Babes.
Okay.
I also have met the Chiefs Chicks and the Dolphins Darlings.
The Dolphins Darlings?
Yeah.
We could probably come up with a different alliteration for Dolphins fans, but we won't. So
family show.
Family show. So that's just more of Dolphin hate than anything else. You must know that well. So
Yeah.
Kristen, is there anything that anybody can know that listens to our show? You know, we're on the Cover One Network. Is there anything that you want people to know about, your organization or things that are coming up in the future?
Yeah, I would just say where to find us. So any of the women that want to join this, you go to Bills Mafia Babes on Facebook, and you'll see it's a locked group. You just got to fill out a couple of questions. We have them on there so that it weeds out the bots that are, the scammers that are trying to come in. Fill those out. We'll let you in. For the men, we do have a public Facebook page, outward facing, that will share different events and things that we're doing. We also have our Twitter, which is @Bills Mafia Babes. Same thing with Instagram. Coming up in the future, we kind of work on a bunch of random things. We've been working on some things with Stevie Johnson that we'll probably see in the near future. We are working on a couple of other projects, and we work with Resurgence and 26 Shirts a lot. So we should be dropping some new merch with 26. We're going to be we are going to be doing some new beers with Resurgence coming this season. Proceeds from all those things do go to the Mafia Babes, which gets passed through to the Players Charity of the Month that those items are sold in. So there's going to be a bunch of ways that we can help. We're going to be volunteering at something called What She's Made Of in Highmark Stadium with the Western New York Women's Foundation. So we are constantly looking for volunteers and help, and for people that just want to come and hang out with some of these events. So keep an eye on the social media, and we're going to be doing some work.
What's that event? What's that event at Highmark? What does that mean? What is she made of?
So what they do is they actually get a panel of women, notable women in Western New York. And sometimes they even bring in people from, other areas of the states as well. And they basically have like a panel, like they'll have like a nice, thing beforehand with hors d'oeuvres and stuff like that. So women can kind of network with each other. And then they take us in and they put you in one of the suites with, all the seats in there. Mm-hmm. M&T Club, I think maybe. Anyways, they bring them in there, and the panel this year is actually speaking to women's health, like mental health, and different ways and ways that impact sports and things like that. So it's always a good time every year, and we help staff volunteers over there for them.
Well done.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
thanks so much for your time, Kristen, and for your efforts and for your advocacy for the Bills and for women. It's really admirable, and hopefully it just continues to grow.
Great meeting you.
Thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Thank you.